Welcome to the next lesson coming up in section 6.3 for the weekend college classes that I teach. So in this section, we're going to look at graphing lines a little differently. And the way we're going to look at graphing lines is to find 2 points. And those points are specifically going to be on the x-axis and the y-axis. So a point on the x-axis that a line passes through is called the x-intercept. And then if we draw a line and that line passes through the y-axis, we refer to that as the y-intercept. So let's go ahead and take a look at this here. So we have here as a horizontal line, that's going to represent the x-axis. And for the vertical line, that's going to represent the y-axis. So the line that goes horizontally here is going to be our x-axis. This is going to be our y-axis. When we draw the equation of a line, whatever that is, where this line crosses the x-axis, that is where it intercepts the x-axis. So we refer to that as the x-intercept. Drawing this line, we also see that it crosses the y-axis. The point at which it crosses the y-axis is called the y-intercept. So when they ask us to identify all the x-intercepts, in the case of the straight line, there's only one. And what they want us to do is identify the point where this line crosses the x-axis when they're asking for the x-intercept. And that point is going to be, in this case, remember we start here, we go to -1, and that's going to be -1, 0. And it says type in as an ordered pair, use a comma, you'll see the directions online. It says identify all the y-intercepts. Well, as we see this line here, it crosses the y-axis at this point here, and the coordinate of this point is going to be 0 and then +1. Now, and that's the answer for question 1. In the case of question 2, this is something that we have not learned about yet, but right now all they're doing is just kind of reinforcing the concept of what x-intercepts are and what y-intercepts are. The two graphs that you see in 2 and 3 here are not going to be the typical types of graphs that we're going to be graphing in this class, but you could anticipate graphing them in intermediate algebra or other class going forward in the future. So here we have the graph of what will likely be, I can't see the whole thing, but it's likely going to be a cubic function, and this is going to be the graph of an absolute value function. Don't have to worry about that. But here it's just asking identify all the intercepts. So what I like to do is just kind of split this in two, and I first want to identify what all the x-intercepts are, and then what the y-intercept is. Now in this case, when you're giving this, you probably won't have to split this up in your homework question. You just have to identify where is the line crossing each of the axes. So one x-intercept is going to be right here at this point, and it's right between -8 and -10. So that's going to be, in this case, -9, 0. The other point on the x-axis is going to cross at is going to be +9, 0. Now in the case of the y-axis, we see this point here where this line seems to land. It seems to land on the y-axis at -8. So for our y-axis, we'll have the point 0, -8. And that seems to be the only place that this line crosses. Now, when you look at this here, you'll notice it doesn't really quote-unquote cross. It actually kind of stops here and then goes through the point. When you study absolute value equations later, making sense of that will be a little clearer. But this function does have contact with the x-axis at this point, and that's why we refer to it as a y-intercept. So here it says identify all the intercepts. So again, for number 3, I'll push that up a little bit now. I'm going to split this up by identifying all the x-intercepts. And then I'm going to identify the y-intercept. So in the case of the x-intercepts, these type of what are referred to as polynomial functions, which you're not going to have to worry about graphing at this stage. This is what's being graphed here. It appears that it crosses the x-axis 3 times. Here, here, and here. This is going to be the point negative 4, 0. This is going to be the point positive 1, 0. And this is going to be the point, pen is dying here. This is going to be the point now 8, 0. The y-intercept, the only place we have this here is going to be at 2. So this is going to be 0 and 2. So I want to just kind of put these 2 points here. You kind of have them in focus on the screen. So one important takeaway that's going to really help us in the next portion of this lesson is at all x-intercepts, you should notice that one thing all these points have in common. That at an x-intercept, all of the y's are equal to 0. So for the x-intercept, y is going to be equal to 0. What you should notice about the y-intercept, even though there are fewer points to compare, is that in both cases here, that for the y-intercept, that x is equal to 0. So in the case of all y-intercepts, we're going to have x is equal to 0. And that's going to be an important idea for when we want to graph the equation of a line using the x and the y-intercepts. Because knowing that fact, that y is equal to 0 at the x-intercept and that x is equal to 0 at the y-intercept, is going to be useful for helping us to graph lines in this way. Go ahead and bring this down here now. I'm going to actually skip this question over here, and I'll let you do that. But I'm going to take a look at number 5 now. It says graph the linear equation by finding and plotting the intercepts. So it wants us to do so. It's specifying here that it wants us to plot the intercepts. So what I'm going to do on the paper here is I'm going to identify what the x-intercept is. And I want to identify what the y-intercept is. So one thing to bear in mind, once we identify the x-intercept, we know that for the x-intercept, and remember these are points, at the x-intercept, that y is equal to 0. So we're looking for the x value in this case. In the case of the y-intercept, we know that the x value is going to equal 0. So in this case, we're looking for the value of y. So the x-intercept, we want the value of x. The y-intercept, we want the value of y. But the other values are going to be 0. So I'll just kind of reiterate this little fact over to the side here. So note the x-intercept, y is going to equal 0. And at the y-intercept, x is going to equal 0. And in both these cases, I'm going to go ahead and rewrite the equation of the line that we're asked to graph. So it's going to be x minus y equals negative 7. And I'm going to write the same thing here. So from here, what I'm going to do is I'm going to replace 0 in place of y. So it's going to be x minus 0 equals negative 7. Well, x minus 0, that's just going to be 0. So that's going to give me x is equal to negative 7. That's going to give you the point negative 7 here. So now I know what the x-intercept is going to be. In the case of x, for the y-intercept, x is equal to 0. So I'm going to put 0 in for x here. When I rewrite this, it's going to be negative y equals negative 7. So that when I divide by negative 1, because that's what's next to the y, I should get y equals positive 7. So I now have my x-intercept, and I now have my y-intercept. So what I'm going to go ahead and do is I'm going to plot these 2 points. Negative 7, 0, that's over this way. And then the point 0, 7, that's up here. So as I plot those 2 points down, I'm going to go ahead and I'm going to use a straight edge to mark the line that we can create by plotting those 2 points. And now, based on using the x-intercept and y-intercept, I have successfully graphed the equation of that line. Now, you've seen the method I've done here. I would suggest you can watch what I do in number 6, but I'm going to recommend, if you want to at any time, pause the video and try this yourself to see what you can do. Because as I mentioned in class, it's better to learn from your mistakes than to just have everything spoon-fed to you. So if you want to stop the video now, go ahead and do so. Otherwise, I'll continue to go to work with this. X-intercept. And here I'm just going to kind of abbreviate x-intercept so I have more room to show my point. And then I'm going to have y, the y-intercept. and I'll put my point here. And remember, at the x-intercept, y is equal to 0, and at the y-intercept, x is equal to 0. I'm going to reiterate that point down here. So I know what I'm going to be subbing into these equations. So I'm going to rewrite the equation that they're giving me here. So they want to graph the linear equation by finding and plotting the intercepts. It's not going to specify that it's x and y, but that will be implied, because those are the only two intercepts we can have in this type of system. So the equation is going to be negative x plus 5y is equal to 10. And I'll write that down here. And here I'm going to put 0 in place of y. So that'll give me negative x plus 5 times 0 equals 10. And here my x is 0, so that's going to be negative 0 plus 5y equals 10. And I'll add a little extra paper underneath here to give me the room I need to complete each of these. So 5 times 0 is 0, so that's going to give me negative x plus 0 equals 10. Or negative x is equal to 10. Well, if I have negative x equal to 10, I need to divide by negative 1. I'll bring this work up a little more. And that's going to give me x is equal to negative 10. So since my x value is negative 10, I'm going to go ahead and put that up here. And then over here, I just have negative 0, so that's just going to give me 5y equals 10. I don't have to write the plus sign, I just choose to anyway. Then if I divide both sides by 5, divide this by 5, that's going to give me y is equal to 2. And those are going to be my intercepts now, and I'm going to go ahead and plot these, and let's see what I get. So I have the x-intercept at negative 10, 0, so I'm going to start here, go to negative 10, and plot my x-intercept there. And then my y-intercept is 0, 2, so I'm going to go up 2, and I now have the 2 points I need to successfully graph this line. And as I graph this on the computer, it does it very nicely. Hopefully you're becoming comfortable and familiar with that tool on the computer to do that. But when you're doing this, on my test, and I think you're going to see one on the final like this, you should be ready to show this kind of work, to show how to graph these by hand. Okay, we're going to jump to the next question now. And again, I'm going to go through some more of these, kind of show how this works. I won't go through every homework problem. You should definitely try some of these on your own. Okay. Let's see how this one's done, and I'll put some separate paper down for this. It says plot the intercepts to graph this equation. So again, I'm going to start by creating my table. I'm going to have, in this case, the x-intercept with a point, the y-intercept with a point. Remember, at the x-intercept, remember this, at the x-intercept, y is 0. At the y-intercept, x is 0. So let's put that down again. And then we're going to write down the equation that we're provided for that we want to graph. So we have the graph of 7x minus 4y equals 28. And I'll write this down here again too. 7 x minus 4y equals 28. And again, I didn't mention it, but I strongly recommend pause the video at this point to see if you can then carry this out, or if you pause the video earlier to try from the very beginning, that's even better. But you may want to pause the video at this point to see if you can calculate the correct x and y values for the respective intercepts. So since y is equal to 0 here, I'm going to get 7x minus 4 times 0 equals 28. Well, 4 times 0 is 0, so that's going to give me 7x is equal to 28. Then if I divide by 7, I'm going to get x is equal to positive 4. And I'm going to put that 4 in the point there. In the case where x is equal to 0, I'm going to put in 7 times 0 minus 4 times y equals 28. Well, 7 times 0, that just goes to 0, so that's going to give me negative 4y equals 28. If I divide by negative 4, I should get y is equal to negative 7. So my x-intercept is going to be 4, 0. So I'll go ahead and plot this here. Here's my x-intercept. And then my y-intercept is going to be 0, negative 7. So from here I'm going to go down 7. And I'm going to plot this point here. And from here, I should have my 2 points. Where am I looking for? Ah, I see it. Looking for my edge here. Here we go. So I'm going to draw that line out, and there's the graph of the equation 7x minus 4y equals 28. So you'll notice that these equations are not in the slope-intercept form that we talked about in previous classes. Well, that's okay. Let's go ahead and take a look at a few of the questions here. Let's take a look at number 8. So one of the things we talked about in class, and we showed in the last video, there are 2 questions where so if you're looking at the graph of like x equals negative 8. You notice here that there's no y in this equation. So there are 2 questions that when you see like one of the variables missing, there are 2 questions you want to ask. The first one is, what axis does the line cross? And then the second question is, where does it cross? Okay, so what axis does the line cross? It crosses the x-axis. Where does it cross? It crosses at negative 8. So that's what this is telling us. So it's going to cross the x-axis at negative 8. So this is the graph, as we discussed in the previous section. This is the graph of a vertical line. And we're going to graph it like such. And if you remember what we did in section 6.2 also, you remember that the slope of such a line is undefined. Okay, so that's just one example of how we deal with vertical lines in this case. So we don't have to worry about like setting y equal to 0 or anything like that. We're just going to graph that as a vertical line. We're going to take a look at another question, kind of similar, but we just have to manipulate it a little bit. So let's take a look at these 2 and see how we manipulate these. So we have the equation y plus 3 is equal to 0. And the other one, we have x minus 3 is equal to 0. You'll notice that in both of these equations here, we only have one variable. So if we're going to graph these successfully, what we need to do is to get the variable by itself. So in the case of y plus 3 equaling 0, I'm going to subtract 3 from both sides, or move it over like I've shown in class before. We're going to get y is equal to negative 3. Here, I'm going to add 3 to both sides. And that's going to give me the equation x equals 3. So when I'm graphing these, I want to ask those same 2 questions I showed in the previous problem. What axis does it cross, and where does it cross? So it crosses the y-axis at negative 3. Crosses the y-axis at negative 3. That's going to make it a horizontal line in order to do that. And as we mentioned before, since that's a horizontal line, the slope of that line is going to be 0. For this one, where does it cross? What axis does it cross? It crosses the x-axis. Where does it cross? 3. So I'm going to put a point on 3 on the x-axis, and I'm going to draw a vertical line. And just to reiterate what I did with the other vertical line I drew, the slope of that line is going to be undefined. Okay. The other 2 questions are things you can work on for yourselves, and I will go ahead and let you work on those questions. That wraps it up for 6.3. 6.4 is coming up.